Welcome back to the Oklahoma Football Podcast, joined by Eli Letterman. I'm Eric Bailey, Tulsa World beat writers for the Sooners. As a big week is ahead of us, it's Bedlam. Eli, I know you got a taste of it last year when you were covering Oklahoma State. You're kind of unique. You get to cover both teams in 2 seasons. And how excited were you last year when you first saw this game, and what do you expect this year?
Well, this is a cool one. We'll probably get into a lot of how this is like it. We're coming into the last few Bedlams, at least for a while, with the Sooners making their exit for the SEC. But I can say I grew up in New York, not college football country at all. But one of the on the radar rivalry games always was Oklahoma State Bedlam, and that I think tells at least part of the story here. Of just what a rivalry this is. And so I was stoked last year. And the fact that game had all the stakes it had on it attached to it, and then the game really delivered. And being there, Mike Gundy's only beaten the Sooners 3 times. I can say I was there for one of them. Slightly lower stakes this year that we got coming in. But an interesting question. I teased to you before we hopped on, but I wanted you to have kind of a fresh perspective on it. I was among OU fans last night. Some pretty serious OU fans, and they had a debate that kind of set me back. They said they were debating, is OU OSU a rivalry? Is it a legitimate rivalry? And most of them said no from that perspective. And it was a lot of the big brother, little brother stuff. It was the 97 and 19, the fact that this historically is not the most competitive rivalry, but I just couldn't believe it. So can I ask your take there? Is this a rivalry game?
I think it is a rivalry game because you know what? Oklahoma fans hurt a lot when they lose. And I think anytime they lose to OSU, it hurts. So I think it is a rivalry game. I know it's easy to say it's not a rivalry game, but hey, it's 2 in-state programs, and you're looking at an Oklahoma State program that's playing really well right now. You're telling me that, a win or loss to them doesn't matter? Now, I will say this. Yeah. Oklahoma does have a really strong rival in Texas, and that rivalry is going to maintain when both those go to the SEC. Here's my question for Oklahoma State, and I even asked some of the players this year in Big 12 Media Days, who is Oklahoma State's rival going to be when Oklahoma leaves the Big 12? And one player, I think, said Iowa State. Someone said Kansas State, and I get it. I see that. Those are some rivalries, but nothing like what Bedlam brings. And I'm kind of curious moving forward who Oklahoma State's rival is going to be. Is there going to be a genuine rival out there? So, but no, for Oklahoma fans, this is a rivalry. I mean, I know some people say, yeah, they dominated this series, but still those times that they lost, it still stings a bunch when you lose to Oklahoma State.
Well, that was kind of my response. I said, so if they lose Saturday, it won't sting any more than losing to Baylor or West Virginia. Answer, of course, was no. Is there history here? Of course. Are there families that are split down the middle? Is there crap that gets talked in a week like this? And all year, it's particularly if Oklahoma State wins it, of course. And as the kind of my trump card on it is I've spent my week talking to people on both sides of the rivalry in the past for a story we'll have out with the Tulsa World tomorrow. And if Dewey Selman and Terry Miller and Pat Jones and Barry Switzer all think it's a rivalry, I side with them. They certainly feel that way.
Well, go. I'm sorry.
Well, no, it's 2022. We got this Bedlam to think about now.
Yeah, and one thing Oklahoma fans have to realize, and Oklahoma State fans as well, this could be the last Bedlam game in Norman for quite some time now. OU's not scheduled to leave until 2025. Things could happen. Maybe they leave in 2024, and if that's the case, this could be the last Bedlam game in Norman for a long time. I don't know. We'll see. And so Kelly Hines had a good story in the Tulsa World this week looking at this series and how it's, how is it going to impact both schools. So we'll see what happens there. This rivalry, Eli, it's been fun. You mentioned your first one was last year. My first one was 2012 overtime game. Crazy game, went to overtime. Blake Bell had a big touchdown to send the game into overtime. Sooners win in overtime. 2013 was my second year. Blake Bell, his very last pass as a college quarterback was back of the end zone throw to Jalen Saunders. And this game is always exciting. You have the punt that shouldn't have been called by Bob Stoops. You look back and you just see all these games. There's great games. Mike Gundy going for 2 points to try to beat the Sooners in Norman a few years ago. A lot going on. Interesting, too, is one thing that they can't settle on, and we talked a little bit about this before, is the series. OU's
Yeah.
official notes say OU leads the series 19-7. OSU's notes say the series is 89-27. So we lost a game there somewhere.
Well, I think in my unscientific research, I might have identified it as that 1972 game where the Sooners won 38-15 in Norman. But according to that falls into, I think, a range where OU was dealing with some kind of NCAA sanctions and forfeited some games in that range. And that might be the discrepancy. But either way, it's historically been a lopsided rivalry, that we know.
You know, it's funny, sold out crowd. The game was announced as a sellout weeks ago, so everyone's looking forward to this game. Evening game surprised me, 6:30 on ABC. Our friend Dusty Dvorak's going to be the analyst. He's already mentioned that he's looking forward to calling a Bedlam game. So 6:30, I mean, it shows that there's still some weight in Bedlam, even though Oklahoma is struggling this season.
Well, I think some of that can be owed to the fact, if you look at the college football slate this weekend, there really isn't much there. That's not to diminish Bedlam, but all the SEC schools are mostly playing their non-conference games. I mean, you got LSU's playing UAB, Missouri's got New Mexico State. So the SEC is a bit off the table, and across the country, there isn't much. And that sets up that even in a down year for this rivalry game, I mean, this is probably one of the years where we've come in neither team really having much going for it, and certainly not much to play for. I think Oklahoma State still has an outside mathematical chance of getting to Arlington, but we're kind of at this point in the year. But you're exactly right. It still has that cachet, and I wonder how the OSU fans will feel about an OU guy in the booth without some kind of counterbalance. They couldn't grab Brandon Whedon or somebody. Maybe the only person they'd be less pleased with would be RG3. I know people haven't loved listening to him call OU games, but it's going to be a fun one.
You know, when we look at these two programs, it feels weird to say this. Two programs are in complete opposite directions right now. We look at Oklahoma State, they're 21-5 over their past 26 games, really playing good football over the last two seasons. We look at Oklahoma, they have 5 losses in 10 games this season. So Oklahoma State, 5 losses in 26, Oklahoma 5-10. I know Brent Venables is trying to turn things around, and, you know, he's had some tough losses, but this is one of those games where you really feel like they need to win this game. I mean, if anything, they need to hit bowl eligibility. They're still not locked in for postseason yet, and they only have 2 more chances to get a win. So this is huge. I know playing at home is going to be a big deal for the Sooners. It's senior night. There'll be some seniors playing their very last games on that stadium field, inside that stadium. So that'll be exciting. But man, this really is a must-win game for the Sooners.
Well, I think, you know, if you'd asked me this time last week of the remaining games on the schedule, I would have looked at West Virginia as, not that any game in the Big 12 or even, you know, any week is a gimme, but I would have looked at West Virginia and said, that's the one where they can get win number 6, get bowl eligible, and we'll see what happens there. That didn't happen. And now Saturday night might have the makings of their most winnable game remaining. I think, you know, Bedlam, a rivalry game, you throw out all the records, all that. There's the home crowd. It's going to be cold. Maybe that, I don't know whose favor that works in. But I sort of have a hard time believing that the Sooners can't get a win this weekend, that then they can go to Lubbock on the road, even though it's been an up and down Texas Tech team. You just start, it's dicey here. If bowl eligibility is important, certainly is to this program. I think there's probably fans out there who are not going to be stoked about an Armed Forces Bowl or a Liberty Bowl, given where the Sooners have been in the past. But the window is closing. And I think, you know, outside of the perception, you remove the perception of not making a bowl game in year 1, losing their bowl streak, second best in the country. If you're thinking about building and where they want to get, and that this is a foundation they're building up, those 15 bowl practices, we heard it this week from both coordinators and Brent Venables. They view that as perhaps the most important part. It's just getting another month with this group. A lot of those young guys that people are going to want to see contribute next year. That's kind of, to me, that's like what they're playing for right now. And they've got two games to achieve it.
To have success on Saturday, we look at this team and offensively, just really disappointing last week in West Virginia. Only 3 scoring drives the whole afternoon. You look 2 weeks ago, they missed out on 5 opportunities to score points in the first half in the loss to Baylor. It's just one of those things where they just cannot find consistency on offense. And I think that's the key. And it really, just surprisingly, it started on 3rd down last week, 1 of 11 on 3rd down. They were 0-2 on fourth down. They just didn't take opportunities to move the chains. And I think against this Oklahoma State defense, it could be a long day if you can't move the football against these Cowboys.
It's an interesting matchup because this is not the Oklahoma State defense of a year ago. I think early on this season, they did a pretty good impression, but the cracks have shown they're allowing more passing yards passing touchdowns than anybody in the league. They have the pass rush, but they don't have the rush defense they had. And so it's a vulnerable defense. Eric Gray should be able to kind of do what he's been doing, and there should be pockets for them to throw into. But as we saw just a week ago, these Sooners can, the way it's gone this season for them, they can get Marvin Mims open downfield, draw up the right play, get him open, and still struggle to connect. And those little things, whether it's the penalties, the third down conversions, the drop passes, they've just found ways to really trip themselves up. And as it's shown, they can't afford to do that. I don't think they can this weekend. I think it sets up for a really big game, important game for Dillon Gabriel. He missed out on Texas, so he didn't get that kind of rivalry introduction, but probably the biggest stage he's ever played on. If you think back on his time at UCF and now in his first season at OU. And the fact is he's struggled relatively these past few weeks. I mean, they've been the three least productive games of his OU career, his young OU career. And I think Saturday, between two teams that are just sort of a little bit all over the place, it could come down to the quarterback play and maybe Spencer Sanders' health. But this is maybe the day you need Dillon Gabriel to go above and beyond. And we'll see if I don't put it all on him, but if he can do it and if this offense can do it. Because you know what, last weekend he had 2 touchdowns basically taken off the board. There was the pass interference with Braden Willis, and then the Marvin Mims throw. Dillon Gabriel did everything right there. So this offense on the whole needs to be sharper, I think, if they're going to come out with win number 6 this weekend.
You mentioned it's the little things. You're right. You mentioned the Mims catch, but the pass interference was huge. 1 yard, that it really is a game of inches, because 1 yard, you just had Braden Willis not catching the ball behind the line of scrimmage, which forced the Theo Weiss pass interference and took a touchdown off the board, took points off the board. So you're right. It's the little things. And that's probably the most frustrating thing to this coaching staff, because they can see it, but they just can't. They're just shooting themselves in the foot too much. I will say I was impressed with Levy a little bit. Running the football. He stayed patient running the football, and Eric Gray really feasted last week. And you're right, there's going to be odd chances to run the football this game too. Just got to stay patient with that. And if you're patient with that, run the football, and you get Dillon Gabriel to connect on some passes, make some throws, you're going to have success offensively. Defensively, I don't know how do you prepare for this Oklahoma State team? You don't know what quarterback you're going to get. My money's on Spencer Sanders playing, because he gives Oklahoma State the best opportunity to win this football game. And it's strange, because it's just, and we talk about inconsistency. I thought last week the defense didn't play too bad overall. I mean, I thought they gave their team a chance to win. Needed to get some more big stops. It just seems like they make critical mistakes at the worst possible times. But giving up 23 on the road, you really think that gives you an opportunity to win a football game? It didn't last week. So we'll see how they build upon that.
Yeah, I think, I agree. It was like a better defensive performance. The issue was they still got beat, like in the places they've been getting beat. So looking right now, I mean, they 7-19 for West Virginia on third down, 4 or 5 on fourth down. So sometimes little things on offense, the little things on defense in those big situations, they were still vulnerable. But the fact is that they got beat on the ground again. What changed that game was the swapping out of JT Daniels for Garrett Green, and a rushing quarterback who was able to run all over them the way Squirrel Williams did when Baylor came, and the way other teams have. And that's where you look this week at a relatively unremarkable OSU backfield. Dominic Richardson's a really good runner. Jaden Nixon has shown flashes. Spencer Sanders can do it with his feet, but we don't know what his status is. I mean, he might be best off just sitting in the pocket. But this is an OU defense that has made unspectacular running games look spectacular at times this year. And so I come into this week wondering, is this finally the time can they stop the run, or is it where they, again, it kind of becomes that same old movie all over again? And something that Brent Venables noted this week, and if you look at the stats, you see it. The 3 linebackers, Deshaun White, Danny Stutzman, and David Guegbu, they're playing, if not every snap every week, pretty dang close to it. And you're seeing that wear down late in games. When you think about having to stop teams and stop a rushing attack that's worn you down late in the game, that depth is hurting them. They lost TD Roof in training camp. Who knows what he could have provided, but he was a veteran. And while Brent Venables spoke really highly of the three freshman linebackers, Jaron Cannett, Kobe McKenzie, Kip Lewis this week, really did. He talked about how in the future, those are going to be guys, and he's excited about that group. But they're not at a place yet where they can relieve the starters. And I think that is, if you want to like really get to the crux of why this defense breaks down late in games, or you think about the late drive against Baylor, and last week West Virginia holds the ball for the final 6 some odd minutes. That depth is what's hurting them, and that goes all the way back to the offseason and shoot back to this time last year. I mean, Bedlam last year, who was the head coach, Eric?
For Oklahoma, I can't remember. Oh yeah, that guy's at USC now. Yeah.
And so and with him, you lost a lot of defensive depth to the draft. Mm-hmm. There were, the depth that they lost, I think, in the offseason has been biting them all year. And that's not something you see when you watch on Saturday, but when you really break it down, I think that could be at the heart of a lot of this.
We talk about depth. Let's go into the injury report, because that really did play a factor in the loss at West Virginia. A couple players missing. There'll be a couple players back this week, it looks like. Just give us an update on the depth situation.
So here's what we got from Brent Venables on Tuesday. I mean, watching there, I was home here for the West Virginia game, but watching at home, I was worried Justin Broyles' career might have come to an end in Morgantown. I don't know what it was like there in the press box. But he apparently it's a hyperextended knee, which sounds painful, is painful, and that's a painful injury, but is a lot better than any of the other possibilities. So it sounds like he's going to be back. He was going to have an MRI late this week, but that was sort of kind of a precautionary, let's just make sure all's good. So Justin Broyles should be back, and also missing at West Virginia were Key Lawrence and Jaden Davis. They're going to be back too. And if you want to, think about having to defend Spencer Sanders, having 3 of your veteran DBs back in there who you didn't have, 2 of them not at all at West Virginia, and Justin Broyles was out from midway through the second quarter on. That's big, and maybe a pretty important one if we're talking about a pass rush and trying to run the football. Is Andrew Rain. He came out in the third quarter. We don't quite know the injury, but he didn't return. And Brent Venables said this week, essentially his quote was, "It'll be up to how Andrew feels." And that leads me to think, not knowing anything about the injury, that Andrew Rain's a gamer. Maybe he can gut this out, but Brent Venables did say he's going to need to have surgery at some point. So whatever he's dealing with is not insignificant. And that could be, we talk about line play a lot, but when you think about X factors, you don't often think about the center. But if there's no Andrew Rain and it's Robert Conjol in there, that could be, one of those things we look back sometime late Saturday night after this game is final and say, man, they really missed Andrew Rain. So that might be more central than any of those DBs is him. And last one, Jalen Redmond, who played 3 snaps at West Virginia. Almost didn't notice it. And the line play was pretty good up front, but he played 3 snaps. Sounds like, he's had knee issues in the past. Sounds like they're still lingering, and that limited him. So TBD on him for this week as well.
You were in Norman this week. I was in Kansas City. It's one of those things where, there's still 2 games to play, but more importantly, signing day is on December 21st, and the Sooners have an opportunity to try to, add some much needed depth to this recruiting class. And so we had a chance to talk to a couple Kansas City players on, we're going to try this. North Kansas City High School star defensive end, PJ, I'm cheating on his first name, Adebawore.
There we go. You got it.
I'm going to have to learn how to say this. I mean, usually all I have to do is...
I think you will.
Yeah.
He's going to be legit if he gets here.
Obo Okoronkwo was the last hard name I had to learn when we used to play for the Sooners. Had a chance to talk to PJ, and then also talk to Cayden Green from Lee Summit North, 2 of the Rivals top 100 players that are on their commitment list for 23. Went up there just with one question: given the 5-5 start, how much struggling OU's had this year, how firm are their commitments? And I was kind of curious what they would both say. And PJ said very firm, strong commitment, said he wouldn't have committed if he didn't mean it, and it's going to stay that way. Cayden Green said he's not going to be decommitting. He's signing next month, and he'll be here in January. Both of them, in fact, will be here in January. So really neat talk with both these young men, just outstanding kids, very polite, very high on Oklahoma and what they're doing. They understand, both of them, that they got to be patient. They have to wait and see what's going to happen. They're building things. They really bought into this message from the Oklahoma coaches. It's funny with PJ first. he's gotten some text messages this week from some power schools. I mean, I think Georgia and Notre Dame are still reaching out, and he says he still gets those things, but he doesn't think nothing of them. He said they have a job to do. They're still going to reach out and just see, take the temperature of things. But he understands that. He understands. He thought when he first started getting these calls, he thought it was the coolest thing ever. Now it's like every day his phone beeps and he knows it's another school calling him, just checking in, making sure, everything's cool with OU. But he adamantly said more than once that he's firm with his commitment to Oklahoma. That's a position of need. Edge rusher, 6'4", long armed. I mean, I had a chance to meet him in person, and just very long length. You're going to like his length if you're an Oklahoma fan. So impressed with him. And his older brother plays at Northwestern, and really a mentor to him too. So I think it's just a neat relationship, that brother relationship that you have. Cayden Green, OU fan all his life. I don't think there's any concerns about him flipping, decommitting. He said really he hasn't got a lot of contact from schools ever since his commitment, or recently, I should say. I think everyone knows he's locked into OU. Offensive tackle said he doesn't know where they'll play him when he gets to Oklahoma, if he'll go inside or stay outside. Just impressed with what his message was. I mean, family was so huge with this, and it was really neat how he told me how he got. And we're going to write about both these guys a little more in the future. When he was getting recruited, it was during COVID, and he made these workout videos at the urging of his mom. His mom said, "Make these workout videos and let these coaches see what you could do," and that's what they did. And Bill Bedenbaugh took notice at OU, so I thought that was pretty cool. And talking to him, but he's still in the Missouri State playoffs. They're in a quarterfinal game, or a Final Four game this weekend too. So they're trying to win a state championship at Lee Summit, and you can tell his focus is on there. Lee Summit North, I'm sorry. You can tell his focus is on that. So I think that's pretty cool. But for Oklahoma fans, both those guys are supposed to be there at the Bedlam game this weekend. Both are going to sign or be in Norman on January 14th to get a head start on their careers. Again, their rivals, 100 players. Both are excited. Both are really pumped about the opportunity to play at Oklahoma. So I had a good time talking to both. We have a story online talking about how firm their commitments are. We'll have profiles on both those players pretty soon as we draw closer to signing day. While I was out of state, I know you made a visit somewhere. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Well, no. Well, shoot. Talking about Cayden Green, Bill Bedenbaugh knows from decent offensive linemen, right?
Yeah.
He's identified it. That tends to be a strong indication.
Yeah.
With Cayden Green.
Yeah, and Cayden Green, he even says that he's a big fan of both Orlando Brown and Creed Humphrey, who play for the Chiefs right there in Kansas City. Mm-hmm. So he's a big fan of those guys, and he sees, he saw what Bill Bedenbaugh can do to an offensive lineman in terms of getting them to the next level. He sees it every Sunday with his hometown NFL team. So, he's excited about the opportunity to get to OU.
Well, you were getting to it though. You were out of town, and I went down to Mustang, and they've got a game against Jenks Friday night. If they can, I think that's going to be one of the bigger playoff games in the state. And I met down there with Jacoby Johnson, who is one of the top ranked recruits in this class and in the state of Oklahoma for this year. But he's also one of only 2 in-state commits to the Sooners for 2023. And kind of heard similar things about this time of year. And I don't think this is unique to the Sooners, but the fact is they are 5-5. Is all their kids are still getting phone calls. That commitment doesn't ward off a lot of people. And so still hearing from a lot of places, and I don't want to spill too much because like you said, we're going to be writing about these guys a lot coming up. But, a lot of what I heard from Jacoby, was a really mature, high school senior, was trusting the process of not looking at the record this year, but he's bought in on what Brent Venables and this staff, he's had a lot of contact with Jay Valai and Jeff Levy. Both sides of the ball is interesting. And he's seemingly, like those guys in Kansas City, pretty firm on this, and I'll have more on him next week. But one interesting note, I spoke with Lee Blankenship about him, the head coach at Mustang, and Jacoby Johnson is 6'3". He's big, sturdy. He plays defensive back and he plays wide receiver. He's coming to OU as an athlete. And I think there might even be some they're going to have to fight on either side of the ball for where they're going to put him, because I think there's a view that he could be elite on either side of the ball.
I'll go back to PJ real quick, if you don't mind. Something that made me laugh now I think about it is just his relationship with Miguel Chavis. I said that's the key to his recruitment. He said that he was the first to reach out to him from OU and said that He calls him all the time, said it's always FaceTime. It's never a phone call. He's always FaceTiming him. I mean, he wants to see you face to face. Said one of the first times he called, he had all kinds of coaches in the car with him too. So Chavis is a big key to this recruiting. And, you know, I get that you get the feel the only way that PJ will decommit is if there's a coaching change, position coach, head coach, which we know not going to happen. So that was something else. I thought it was really big how he just said how much he really has been impressed by Miguel Chavis.
Yeah, well, recruiting on the whole, like this time of year, it's November 17th at 11:48 a.m. Right now, the Sooners class is largely intact. But this next month, it's about getting to signing day with this group, and ideally, I think for the Sooners adding to it. You mentioned those guys will be in town. David Hicks, who is the A&M commit, who flipped on the Sooners. He's going to be here this weekend, and we've seen how things are going at A&M. So for as much as people might point out and say, OU has guys who are vulnerable because of how OU is playing, so does Texas A&M, and so do winning teams. I mean, this is the time of year where every kid in the country who is coveted and anyone that a bigger program or any big program thinks they can flip is going to be hearing. So this next month is important. And we know how, I talked about those December practices, if they can get those for the bowl game, are big toward building to the future. Maybe more important than that is getting this first full Brent Venables signing class across the line. And that is where, if you're tired of this season and 5-5, look at the recruiting end of it and say, this is where the future is going to be and where it's going to come from. So they've got to get to December 21st. But Eric, away from this, you had a fascinating story today in the Tulsa World about the Road Warrior.
The OU Road Warrior, Phil Owens, Oklahoma City lawyer, has been to 403 straight OU games, be number 404 at Bedlam this week. Had a chance to talk to him, and just a genuine Oklahoma fan. And it's funny because I asked, why do you do this? He said, I'm not special. I just do it. I just like OU football. I just do it. I mean, he just thinks of himself as an everyday guy, but it's not often you see someone dedicating Saturdays to OU football, like as much as he had since 91. He hasn't missed a game, which is incredible. It's an incredible string. There's a lot on that story. If you get a chance to read it, for people out there, I asked him to pick his favorite 5 Bedlam games, favorite 5 wins, 5 toughest losses, toughest weather days. And let's just talk about Bedlam first of all. When I asked him about Bedlam, he said he doesn't use the B word because in a rivalry this lopsided, it doesn't deserve a name.
See,
so
we talked about earlier. There's some folks who don't even look at it that way.
Exactly. So he said he never says the B word. And so memorable OU games. He said 1990. Believe it or not, 1990 is one of his favorite ones. Eli, I don't even think, you weren't born then. I'm sorry.
I was hardly a thought yet.
I know. I don't know if your parents were even, hadn't met yet. 1990 was he took me back, and I remember this now. Oklahoma playing OSU, a couple seconds left. Oklahoma was going to down, right out the clock. Pat Jones calls timeout for 4th down. It's like ball was at midfield. And instead of letting the clock run out, Pat Jones calls 4 timeouts to try to get OU to punt. Well, instead, OU, by quarterback Cale Gundy, calls a Hail Mary, and it's infamously known as the Cale Mary, because found a touch Adrian Cooper in the end zone for a touchdown on the final play, and OSU basically helped him get that touchdown. So he said that was one of his favorite Bedlam memories. Also, 44-7 when the Bob Stoops' first year, 52-9. Les Miles, OSU coach, was on the ABC broadcast before the game when they did the coaches interviews, and OSU was playing really well. And Les Miles tells the ABC reporter, let's let her rip. And then OU wins 52-9. I know Brent Venables even mentioned it.
Yeah, I was going to say, he mentioned it. He kind of got a chuckle. He didn't say anything. He just basically repeated the quote and then chuckled this week. And so he's probably still got some fond memories there. I will say this. You mentioned 1990, November 17th, 1990. My parents, in fact, got married. Today is their anniversary, and I know they'll listen. So quick, happy anniversary to them. I was a thought then, but a minimal thought. Happy anniversary to them. 32 years.
That's awesome.
But the Cale Mary came right around their wedding day.
Well, good for them. But yeah, then we just went down the list with Phil. We went down favorite OU wins. He mentioned the OU win over Nebraska in 2000. It was Red October when OU won in 2000 to get back on, to really reach the mountaintop again. Road games at Tennessee and Ohio State. It was just a fascinating conversation with them. We had a really good time going back and kind of reliving these moments in OU history over the past 30 years. So if you get a chance, it's on the website. Lastly, let's talk some basketball. We haven't had, there's games going on now, and Oklahoma's coming off a pretty impressive win, aren't they?
Yeah. So shoot, it was Tuesday night this week, man. It's been a blur, but Tuesday night, after kind of the loss to Sam Houston to open things, and still kind of a shaky win over Pine Bluff last Friday, finally felt like a non-conference early season basketball game at Lloyd Noble. I mean, Oklahoma hosted UNC Wilmington, and it's a good Wilmington team, but it felt like a power conference team hosting a mid-major, and they jumped out early. They were the more talented team, and they played like it. Hit their first 4 3-pointers, and those were their first 4 shots from the field. And I think that was really an important turning point, because Porter Moser has said, we're getting the right shots, they're just not falling. And there's no debating, even if you feel good about what you're doing, that when the shots finally fall, he said that first media timeout, they came to the bench and everyone just knew, like, all right, it's working for us. And it continued that way. And the big development to me was that Joe Bamisil, the George Washington transfer, finally had his big night, because he has struggled through those first 2 games, and he had kind of a short leash with Porter Moser. And you're sitting there thinking, well, this guy's, a junior. He's not a freshman. He, is a veteran guy who's experienced and all that. What's up? And finally the shots fell for him Tuesday night, and it was his big breakout, was part of easily their best performance this season. Tomorrow night they host South Alabama. That'll be their final home game of a 4-game homestand to kick things off, and then we'll probably really get a sense of who they are when they go to Florida next week, play some other bigger programs in kind of one of your early season tournaments.
Oklahoma. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, the women, I was gonna just mention to you.
Yeah,
lay it on us.
What a game. Sooners start 3-0. Let's see, what is today? Okay, Tuesday night. Real nice road win against BYU, 3-0, and then they go and they hit a buzzsaw when they went to Utah. It's not often you see schools go back-to-back. Oklahoma played BYU on Tuesday, went to Utah on Wednesday night and lost 124-78. Most points ever allowed by an OU women's basketball team. Previous high was 111 in the 2017-18 season overtime game up in Chicago. So tough loss for Jenny Baranchek and her team, and it just they played so well, but it tells you they need to outscore teams to win games, and this might be a good indication of they do. If they're not shooting well, not sharing the basketball, too many turnovers, it could be a nightmare scenario. So it's something, if you're in the preseason, it's not a bad loss, because Utah's going to go out and win a lot of games, but still, it really opens up your eyes to a lot of things you need to fix. If you're Coach Baranchek, they are off and they have 2 more road games. It's a 4-game road stretch for OU, which you really don't see a lot of road games. They go to Arlington on Sunday, and then they go Arkansas State on Tuesday. So we'll see if things can get turned around. But Oklahoma, I think it was just one of those things where it is an eye-opening moment for the Sooners.
Probably one of those early season losses that might have been needed, when that comes, but certainly exposes. I think we knew they were going to score a lot of points this year. This tells you that they're going to need to maybe shore things up, because, as you said, unless they're going to outscore everybody, and the expectations that are there for this team to go deep into March, the defense is probably going to have to come with that.
All right. Well, Eli, this is probably our longest one we've done. We did a lot of things, the Bedlam week, recruiting, so it's been a lot of fun. We'll be back next week to see if Oklahoma still needs that 6th win for bowl eligibility, or maybe they could enjoy their Thanksgiving dinner before they prepare and go to Lubbock. So, Eli, thanks for joining us. We'll be back next week. Thanks for watching us. You can check this out on where, Eli? Where can you get these podcasts?
Everywhere you get your podcast, Spotify, Google, Apple, everywhere. And of course, you can read our stuff at TulsaWorld.com. We're going to, between us and the OSU beat and whole staff effort, it's going to be a good week of coverage at the Tulsa World and TulsaWorld.com. So please tune in, read, all that.
We got a minivan full of 6 people headed to Norman from Tulsa, so we're looking forward to it.
And I'm glad that I'm already halfway here. I don't need to be in that.
We'll meet you there. Thanks for watching, everybody.